With the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the UK's involvement in supporting Ukraine, many people back home in Britain are curious about what life is like for me, a British guy here in Russia. They often ask me, is it dangerous? Do people treat me differently because I'm British? What's the general attitude towards the UK? And in this video, I will share my first-hand experience of living in Moscow as a Westerner, specifically a Brit, in 2024. And right now, I'll give you a spoiler for the entire video. Yes, in general, life is very safe here for me, even as a guy with a passport from a country that is supplying weapons to Ukraine. This video comes to you from Lefortovo Park, which is the park here in my suburb of Moscow and a place I like to come for a walk here in winter. People around the world, and I admit that sometimes I've been guilty of this too, often associate certain mindsets, beliefs and opinions with someone's place of origin. Sometimes these associations are light-hearted and harmless. For example, if you meet someone from Australia, we might assume they love rugby and they love spending their time on the beach. Or if they're from Brazil, we might think of carnival dancing and football. However, these assumptions can also touch on deeper aspects of identity, like religion and political beliefs. And when I reflect on how others might perceive me based on my British background, I realise that some stereotypes, of course, may hold true, but in matters of religion, for example, I don't believe in God. And politically, there are very few British politicians from my lifetime that I can say I've genuinely admired. My point is that many of us in the West have automatic associations when we hear someone is from Russia. Yet the reality is that every individual Russian is uniquely complex. Yes, sometimes it's true that a Russian is Orthodox Christian or a supporter of Vladimir Putin or whatever comes to your mind when you hear Russian. But often people are far more intricate than these assumptions generally allow. In Russia, people also have assumptions about Brits, but I can say there's a key difference I've noticed between my Western and Russian acquaintances. In Russia, nobody automatically assumes that I support the British government, the Prime Minister or their policies. They don't assume that I'm pro-monarchy or that I love NATO or that I agree with Britain's foreign policy, particularly towards Russia. On the other hand, in my experience, many Brits tend to assume that most Russians automatically support their government. And when I tell someone in Moscow that I'm from Britain, this is not a thing. Many ordinary Russians feel inside that they have no influence over their government and therefore believe that I, as an ordinary British person, have no influence over the British government. And of course, to a certain extent, that's true. Therefore, I can say that with ordinary people, I'm not in danger, I'm completely safe, because just because I'm British, it doesn't mean that I support the British government and their policy towards Russia. So why should I not be safe? In fact, when I meet someone new here, whether it's in a bar or elsewhere, they're often genuinely excited to talk to me. Conversations turn to topics like football, music, TV shows, movies, and inevitably politics. And I'm often met with a great deal of respect, especially as someone who chose to stay in Russia when most other Westerners left. If you visit Russia in 2024 and you mention that you're British, people might be surprised that you came during such a challenging time, but they'll be thrilled to chat with you and they'll be eager to make friends, and you might even find them buying you a drink or two. Many Russians really have a soft spot for something British, whether it's a favourite musician or a memorable trip to London, and they'd love to share their thoughts with you. And look, there's always a chance that something doesn't sit well. That's a different story. Maybe you'll say something wrong, or wrong in their opinion. But rest assured, it'll be because of what you say. Nobody will dislike you simply because you're British. That's just not true. But what about if I do give my opinion? What if I say something that could be interpreted by someone as anti-Russian? Does that put me at risk? Well, in general, the answer is no. I mean, here people love to discuss, debate, even argue about various topics. Russia is far from homogenous in its opinions. People here have views from all over the spectrum, from the most hardcore Z-head Putin lover to people who constantly bash everything Russian and want to leave and run away to the West, and of course everything in the middle. These different viewpoints often exist within the same friendship circles or even within families. I mean, it's probably the same in your own home. Your views are very likely different to those of your parents. But I can tell you one thing that often does come up and often does cause an argument. I mean, look, I've lived here in Moscow for 8 years. I can say that this city has become my home. I clearly love it. But there's a mindset here among some Russians where they feel free to criticize their country. But if I voice the exact same complaint, it's not always well received, even if I say it in the exact same terms. And this can be something very minor. I don't know, for example, the streets don't have enough drains here in Moscow often, so when it rains a lot, often the water builds up, and it's something you don't see as often in the UK. That can cause arguments. But in reality, even when talking about politics or international relations, most people are open to listening. They're trying to understand, discussing, debating, arguing, without even putting me in danger. I remember one night in Moscow after a few drinks, I met an older dude in a pub and we got in a heated debate about politics. I was worried that I might have crossed the line, but instead we ended up laughing, agreeing to disagree. He bought me a drink and it was great. That's a super common experience here. Just because you might voice an opinion out loud which someone might not disagree with doesn't mean it's going to be dangerous for you. It's the same here as everywhere else. But what about other types of safety? Well, personally, here in Moscow, I feel remarkably safe here in almost every aspect. Petty crime, for example, particularly in the city centre, is exceedingly rare. In fact, I've stumbled home at 6 a.m, very drunk after a night out with my iPhone, wallet full of cash, and I've never once worried about getting into trouble. In contrast, if I were in London, I'd be far more cautious. And look, admittedly, I might take a few too many risks here, and perhaps I am overestimating my safety. I mean, for instance, when working in a coffee shop, I'll often leave my laptop unattended while I step away to the bathroom, something I'd never dream about doing in the UK for fear that my laptop would just be stolen immediately. I admit that maybe I'm a little overconfident, as crime, of course, does exist. I can just confidently say I've never experienced it or witnessed it firsthand. But why is Moscow so safe? First off, the city has a significant police presence with a high number of police officers per capita. And this visible law enforcement presence definitely serves as a strong deterrent to criminal activity. Another reason is probably Russia's strict laws, and particularly those governing public order and behaviour. The penalty for crimes here in Russia are often much harsher than those in the UK. In fact, in my opinion, often excessively harsh, which further, of course, discourages criminal behaviour. People don't want to get locked up for a long time for a relatively minor crime. Another major factor is Moscow's extensive surveillance infrastructure. As one of the most surveyed cities in the world, Moscow is equipped with a vast network of CCTV cameras that monitor essentially all public spaces. This level of surveillance not only helps in preventing and solving crimes, but acts as a significant deterrent to any potential offenders. Furthermore, the widespread use of facial recognition technology adds another layer to this, allowing authorities to identify and apprehend individuals long time after an incident has occurred. Cultural factors may also play a role, though these are of course harder to quantify. Interestingly, despite common assumptions linking immigration to crime, Moscow, which is home to millions of migrants completely challenges this narrative. I'd actually be interested to hear your perspective on these points. I don't think immigration and crime are inherently linked like many people online seem to think. And Moscow really does prove that. Here in the centre, there's so little petty crime, despite being completely full of migrants doing lots and lots of different jobs. The main crime to be concerned about in Russia is scams. I receive an overwhelming number of scam calls every day, and this has become a significant challenge for the authorities here. This issue is often exacerbated by frequent large-scale data breaches, affecting everything from food delivery apps to major banks. These breaches mean that scammers often have access to extensive personal information. And while I think I'm generally vigilant and can avoid falling for these schemes, it's an issue. Many people do fall for them. But it's worth noting to you, if you're going to be a visitor here to Russia without a Russian phone number or a Russian bank account, you're very unlikely to be targeted. I just wanted to bring this up because despite the overall safety on the streets here in Russia, cybercrime is a major concern, and it's important that I don't overlook what could be a big negative, because of course this video has been overwhelmingly positive. So the elephant in the room, the police and the authorities. This is a far more sensitive and complex issue than the topics before, and I find it difficult exactly to articulate exactly where I stand. It's definitely true that many Westerners have been arrested here in Russia, and in most cases I believe they were likely guilty of the charges against them. However, there are a number of instances where I'm not convinced of their guilt, although for obvious safety reasons I am not going to delve into those specific cases here on a public YouTube video. But this uncertainty understandably concerns me and many other people considering visits to Russia. So my personal advice is follow the law very closely. Stay away from trouble. Don't engage in protests. Avoid controversial social media posts. Be careful what you post online. And of course, steer very clear of any illegal activity. It's not about being paranoid, it's about being smart. I follow this approach, and it's allowed me to live here in Moscow for 8 years peacefully and without issues. If you do that, the chances of you encountering legal trouble in Russia are minimal. Not zero, but fairly close. That said, in my view, the problem of the police, the authorities, is a greater risk than petty crime or a minor argument escalating into something violent. So it's really important that I address this issue, even briefly, because it's a reality that visitors should be aware of. I make it a point here in Russia to strictly follow the laws, staying well within the boundaries, not even approaching them. And I strongly advise you to do the same when visiting to Russia. Engaging in any criminal activity here, or even getting close to any criminal activity here, is a profoundly unwise decision. So there you have it, my honest take on what safety is like in Russia, in Moscow, as a Brit in 2024. The reality is obviously far more nuanced than many people would have you think. Yes, there are challenges, and yes, there are many things to be cautious about, but overall, life here is very safe. And for me, not only has it been safe, but everyone's been very welcoming and life has been very fulfilling. Whether you're considering a visit or you're just curious about what life is like on the ground here, I hope this video has given you some valuable insights and perhaps even challenged a few of your preconceptions. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to this channel for more content from me about life here in Russia and my personal experiences here. And if you have any questions or thoughts, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you and engage in a discussion about safety here in Russia, in Moscow. So, okay, until next time.